I'm so lucky.
Yeah,
I'm so
you are
lucky.
very
I didn't know how lucky I was until later in life, but
Hello everyone. In this video I have a special guest, my friend Evelyn from Los Angeles. She is bilingual. She speaks English and Spanish, and since I've always been interested in natural bilingualism, today we're going to talk about her experience growing up bilingual. So Evelyn, you can say hi.
hi everyone.
Yeah. Evelyn, maybe first you could talk about your background, where are you from, and why you actually speak two languages.
So I grew up in Los Angeles, California, and specifically in the east side of the city, meaning where many people who reside there are coming from Mexican descent, and both of my parents are Mexican. My mom and my dad were born in Mexico, and when they went to the U.S., they didn't have to learn how to speak English because everybody spoke Spanish in the community. So growing up, I was required to learn the language, and I actually didn't start academically learning English until I started grade school. So like about the age of 6 or 7, I started speaking the language.
All right, so that was my first question. When did you actually learn English? Because you were growing up in Los Angeles, so you didn't have to use English as a kid, or?
No, I didn't have to use English because most of the people surrounding me spoke Spanish. It was up to I would say even today, it's more of a requirement to learn Spanish sometimes than it is to speak English, because the majority of the community doesn't speak any English. So I didn't have to learn.
Yeah. So when you go to your school first time, the elementary school, did you already speak English?
No,
or?
I didn't.
So how is that possible? And how did you start?
Most of the people, there were some kids, so I remember being scared because some kids did know English and did know Spanish. So I remember being scared of speaking the language when I was little and didn't want to speak it. But the other young kids would speak to me in Spanish because they knew that I didn't speak it.
Okay. So
Yeah.
so you had support from the kids from
Yes.
the community.
Yes,
right?
and the teachers as well. The teachers were often coming from the Latino descent, so they were often bilingual as well, because there were so many students that didn't speak the language. English specifically, yeah.
So do you remember the process of learning English at this point?
I don't exactly remember the process of learning it, but I remember speaking it for the first time.
Could you tell us
Yeah,
about
I remember, because I understood the language because my brothers and my sisters did speak English, but everyone always spoke Spanish to my mom. So
Did they speak English to one another?
yes,
Like your
among
siblings?
each other. They spoke English among each other, but not to my mom. So I understood the language, but never spoke it, never wrote it, and didn't really, interact with it. But I remember saying words when I remember starting to say words in English and being really embarrassed doing it. And this was around first grade, so I was about 6 or 7. Yeah, first grade in grade school. And I was just really embarrassed because I knew the language. I just was really afraid as a kid to speak it.
Yeah, that's very interesting that you kind of
Yeah.
overheard English because of your siblings.
Yep.
So you learned to understand it, but you never had the chance to use it. So how did you actually develop your English skills at school? Do you remember that process, or?
Yeah, I always had difficulties because in the US what we're learning American standardized English. So that also requires a specific pronunciation. And you're also learning a grammar syntax like in a specific way based on like the US standards. And I was often told to stay after school because I had problems with the language, writing it, and
But was it like a punishment, or it was more like just
no, it wasn't
catching up?
Yeah, catching
session.
up. Reading. I had trouble reading, and I had trouble writing it. I often misspelled words because I spoke Spanish. So in Spanish, most words are spelled the way they sound. In English, it's not like that. So a lot of the time I had a lot of misspellings, or my reading wasn't as quick. It wasn't as fast as all the other students. So I, through all of grade school, I was often given additional assistance after school for to better my English, basically. And that kind of followed me on through middle school and high school. But that's kind of common, I suppose, because a lot of my friends had similar issues, especially the ones that had parents who only spoke Spanish and not English. They struggled with English more.
But something happened at some point that your English became even better than your Spanish, or is that the thing, or maybe?
Yeah, it is a thing.
Was it in high school?
When I realized it? No. No, I realized that I knew a lot more English, like in my second year of college. That's when I realized that I knew more English vocabulary, more and just more English, like regarding culture and everything. I knew more than I did Spanish.
Would you say like it's your major language right now? Like that's the language that you think in most of the time, or English? I mean.
No, because I talk to my mom every other day, and I talk to her in Spanish only. So. It just depends there's just some words that they are very natural to the language, and if I feel comfortable, or I think that the word within the language is meant to describe a certain object or situation, that's when I use my preference. I just have a preference, I guess, I can choose from, but they're both always kind of in my mind, mingling. Yeah,
two languages, but so you could say you're a native speaker of two languages.
Yes, I feel more comfortable saying that now than I did when I was younger. Yes.
But because of your English or because of your Spanish?
Because of both. Because when I started taking like Spanish literature classes, I also realized how much more I realized how much vocabulary I was lacking, and also my lack of knowledge within the culture. I wasn't really that much aware of it, and I think once I became more fluent in the language in a more, I guess you can say, like academic setting, I felt like I was also strong in these two areas in the Spanish language, where I can speak to the common person like my mother, and then I can also speak in a professional environment, and that's when I felt I was bilingual and bilingual in both.
So you felt like at some point you actually had to work towards that, like
yes, yes,
to develop your academic Spanish,
yes,
right? Academic Spanish.
Yes.
So you're telling us how you got to that realization that you needed to develop your academic Spanish.
Yes.
But how actually you how actually you did it? Like
How did I do it?
Yeah, how did you get to that level?
I
Like, was
see.
the educational system helpful for you to get to that point?
For Spanish specifically, no. Because in high school, most of the courses that are offered are for beginning Spanish speakers, and though I mean I knew how to write, speak, and read Spanish, but I didn't know like the very specifics of the language. But these classes were often very easy because they were teaching the very basics of hello, hi, how are you?
Have you ever attended this kind of classes?
I finished the whole year of one.
No, the whole year of
Yes.
learning Hola.
Hola, yes, of learning Hola.
You must have been the best student.
I was the very best student in there, but that was the only class that, Spanish class that was offered. And many of the students were not native speakers because where I live, there's a large Asian community, so a lot of them were Asians. But there was a lot of also Latino descent who spoke the language and also found the class very easy. And then when I went to college and I started taking college courses, and there were some classes that were offered for native speakers.
So only at the level of college?
Yes.
Before. So in high school, you had to just go through that regular system that was not really adapted to your needs.
Correct, yeah. Yeah, and then and at the university level there was a program for native speakers, and in that class I was among students who also learned Spanish through their family or understood Spanish but were too shy to speak it, or they just were more naturally comfortable with the language in one way or another. And I think that's when I really became interested in the language itself, not only because I was being introduced to reading and writing, but also because I was so far away from home. I was so far away from the east side of Los Angeles and away from my mom, and I was no longer speaking in the language. And there was a moment where I felt that I felt kind of lonely. It's really true. I felt lonely because I wasn't speaking Spanish. I spent like 3 years not speaking Spanish because I would only call my mom like at the time like once a week, once every 2 weeks, and only for about 30 minutes or so. But my daily interaction with professors and students was in English, and I missed it. I missed speaking Spanish, so I took more and more Spanish literature classes to kind of not feel lonely.
Yeah. Yes, I see. So that was the factor. Like you felt like you were missing something. Like Spanish is part of your identity.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. No. I remember thinking that I feel lonely.
And
like
you realized that in college.
Yes.
In college. Okay. So because it's very interesting to me, like on the high school level, how did you feel about it in the high school level? On the high school level, because in college you were a bit more mature, but in high school you are more exposed to and rely on the community around you, and maybe you want teenagers, they usually want to fit in or something.
Right.
So how is Spanish seen by high schoolers or like in that community?
Yeah. Well, I had. So usually in my community, I felt comfortable speaking the language, and the people around me felt comfortable. But outside of my community, outside of the Spanish-speaking community, I did not feel comfortable speaking the language because I was also shy to speak it. I was often scared that people would think that I didn't know English and that they would treat me differently for not knowing English, even though I do know English. But my parents already kind of adds may add like a stereotype that I speak Spanish. So if I speak Spanish, I'm kind of affirming that, I guess you can say. But I was embarrassed to speak it, and I started embracing it a lot more. Embracing it and speaking it, and all of that kind of came more in college. But in high school, like just in my community, among my friends, most of us spoke like in both languages, Spanish and English. There was often like some tension with those students that had parents that spoke English, and that resulted in the friends or the students themselves not really speaking Spanish the way I or other students spoke Spanish. And I also felt that they were maybe outcasted a little bit as well from the rest of us, because they had parents who spoke English, so that also meant that they didn't really learned Spanish as fluent as we did, because they had English in their household. But yeah, and so there was that part of it, and then the other part is, yes, there's a lot of not just shame in the language, but also with the identity of being Latino, maybe just like in a big diverse city. When you step out, and so the language is tied to kind of like maybe the way you look. And so you, again, kind of going back to the same thing that I felt that I would just affirm what I look like with the language, and people would treat me different. So anytime I was outside of my community, yes, I was embarrassed. But inside my community, not really. Unless someone made me feel uncomfortable. But most of the time, no. Because I was around my friends or people who spoke Spanish. So I was bilingual, so I always had an advantage.
Yeah, but it sounds like it's really challenging to maintain your heritage language. At least in your case, it seems like it. Like you had a lot of thoughts about it, and worrying what people are going to think about you. But luckily, it didn't stop you from actually developing your Spanish. But to many people, I think it might actually happen that they stop developing their heritage language just because of these stereotypes associated with it. But so so why actually you think it's worth maintaining the heritage language, or maybe it's not worth at all?
No,
maybe.
It is. No, it is really. I'm so happy I did.
Because it seems like it's a lot of work, right? Like you had to go for extra classes and go through all these hard situations. Yeah.
Well, kind of going forward with like in the university environment, I was really, when I was enrolled in these Spanish classes, I saw that a lot of the students who were in these classes were not coming from the heritage of the language, and I just saw how fascinated they were in the culture, in the language. And I thought, oh my God, like I had never participated in any of this. And here are all these other students who may or may not have such a close relationship to the language, and yet they have this desire to learn it. And it was often embarrassing to me to meet like people from, I don't know, Denver, and they're completely fluent in Spanish, and they know more words than I do. They write it better than I do.
And they were not heritage speakers.
No, they were not heritage speakers. And I was like, and I kept thinking, this is really embarrassing almost, because I couldn't believe that all these other ethnicities were interested in the language that I grew up learning, but I also grew up disliking, because it brought me so much trouble. Because I was learning English and Spanish at the same time, I often ran into trouble. And even more at like, for instance, in the university level, I often had to code switch, to being using more academic terminology, and that was also kind of a challenge that contributed to the language. And after I saw how many other cultures were embracing the language, I thought, no, I should do the same thing because it's already it's natural for me to say and speak in the correct verb tense or whatever. I don't have to study that. I just know it.
You don't have to think about
I don't have to think about it. I just do it. And I thought this is an advantage I have, and I should use it. So it was actually, I guess it required me to see other cultures taking so much interest in the language that I spoke my whole life, for me to actually appreciate it even more than I did beforehand.
Yeah, so you just got like an outsider's perspective, and then you realized what treasure you had already.
Yeah, and it felt good. It felt really good. It felt good, because afterwards I decided to travel to Spanish-speaking countries. I was in Chile for 6 months, and now in Mexico, and I'm going to be here for 9 months, and I don't know if, had I not embraced the language, if I would have pursued visiting these other countries where I'm also a native speaker to them in many ways. They say, oh, but how is it that you're from the US and your Spanish is so good? And I say, oh, because my parents are Mexican and I grew up only learning Spanish. And that, to me, that's also sometimes a little heartwarming, because I feel part of them, because I, not 100%, but I speak Spanish at the same level they do, even though we're miles apart.
So you can connect to like 300 million people all over the world.
Yeah, and and some people would tell me, oh, your accent, you still have like an accent, but I mean, that's also going to be based on the area I'm in, the regional area. From LA, so that's also kind of developed its own thing going on over there. But yeah, so it's I'm glad I did. I'm really glad I learned to embrace it as an adult as well.
Yeah. So it seems like you were very lucky to realize that and use that potential. But there is many kids who growing up in the United States, with Spanish-speaking families, that don't have a chance, or maybe they don't even realize what they have already. And so maybe you could tell them what can they do with it, like, or that they really shouldn't think that it's something disadvantages to them that they speak Spanish, because it's definitely not.
No, it's they or you, like, you already know it, like, you already know the language, it's in you, you have your family, all you have to do is just apply it to where you are, where you're living, and use it. And I know sometimes it is scary and sometimes intimidating, especially if there's people who may be more fluent and they might intimidate you. Because I know I would often get intimidated by these other entities that were, again, like from Denver or whatever, and they spoke Spanish.
Hello to Denver.
I don't know. I don't know. They spoke Spanish better than I did, and I thought, man, how is that possible? But it's possible because even though it's natural in you, it's naturally living in your body, living in your mind, living in your everyday life, because you're surrounded by your family or your culture. You still have to, I think, learn that it's not just Spanish, but any paternal language that you learn as a child is a gift that you have that. And all you have to execute it. Even it's like, I know a lot of people just understand it and feel afraid to speak it, but they just need to execute that. Whatever it is that they understand, execute it when you speak it. And it's very valuable. I've been able to communicate with my community so much. That's also where I saw most of my value, being working in LA, in a very diverse city. I worked as an after school coordinator, and many of my students were Latino, and they their parents only spoke Spanish, and they came to me. They were able to come to me, and I was able to talk to their parents. I was also able to help the students in the same issues that I had as a child. I was able to help them. I knew what they had. I knew where and how I can help them, because I had the same issues with like the sounding of the language, the writing of the language, and I knew what words they were confusing and why they were confusing them. And that was such an advantage to me, because there were about 60 kids, and about I would say like 30 of them, almost half of them, were Hispanic, and I was able to really cater them, because they all had the similar language barriers that I had. And I was also able to communicate with their parents, my community, and help them and show them these are the steps you have to take, so that they are not scared of speaking Spanish, and that they're not scared of speaking English. And I also, a lot of parents asked me, do you think they should learn Spanish in school? And I said, yes.
But this course is like hello, hola, and
no. So now I don't know if it's on all the schools, but I know but when you're little, those courses should help you if you're just learning the formal, like hello, how are you. I think if they're small, that could help them, because that could also help them start speaking it. Saying like the basic, right? Even if they might know it already there. But if everyone's doing it as a classroom, then everyone can participate.
That might give them a bit more confidence
when they're young,
like,
yeah. But if you're an adult,
I'm good at this, you know?
Yeah. And so I do let them know, like, yes, have them take them. And also because, and if they're in bilingual programs, they're learning both languages. And yes, I know there's a lot of like issues with students learning sometimes two languages at the same time, or some programs might not work as well. But overall, like I don't think they're gonna get largely affected if they're just learning a new language.
So you are talking about the programs that schools have, but there is many things that students or people can do by themselves, right?
Yes.
Nowadays.
Yes.
And you mentioned you developed your Spanish mainly through reading Spanish literature. I think that this content consumption in Spanish is very crucial for developing your vocabulary. Films. What else could you recommend to do for people who don't have access to those programs? For heritage speakers.
Often I watch a lot of films in Spanish, and I also read in Spanish, but also anytime I have the opportunity to meet someone who speaks the language that you want to learn, like I would recommend highly to become friends with them, and also for them to give you recommendations on anything, because they're going to have a different interest. So they might listening to podcasts, listening to the news in Spanish, watching just general television, also kind of playing games. A lot of games that are played in English can also be played in Spanish as well when you're with your friends. But it's mostly, I think, making friends with people of the language that's being spoken, because I learned so much vocabulary from people more than did often from books and films. I think books and films can help you with like larger ideas, thinking in the language. Maybe I would go and say that you're thinking in the language, but in more specific, like words. I think speaking to people, words, even mocking or emulating an accent, you start
playing with the language a little bit. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it kind of requires a conscious effort because it's so easy just to go by and without using Spanish for anything, because it's much easier to use English. But if you want to develop your Spanish, which is worth it, you just need to consciously pick certain content that you consume in Spanish, like podcasts, books, even computer games. Just surround yourself with Spanish-speaking people who are not your family, because with family you tend to talk about the same things all the time. Over and over again. So they may not be helpful with developing your vocabulary or getting confidence in speaking about something else. Then
when I was in school at the university level, because I went to community college and then I went to the university, and then there I actually went out and looked for my community to see if there was like organizations or clubs that were oriented around Latino students, and I wanted to participate in the culture that I was part of back at home. And that's kind of to just supplement that. I found a community, and especially in the Spanish classes as well, because a lot of Latinos took Spanish classes, and I was able to communicate with them. And I know my conversations were not about family anymore, and that's why I had to learn new vocabulary as well, because one was the book academic vocabulary, and then it was my home vocabulary, and now I had to develop this conversational vocabulary in the language. And that was very different. I remember thinking, oh, that sounds weird saying that, or and so definitely speaking to other people, not just your family, is very helpful.
So I think that from what you're saying, I can imagine that it's a lot of effort to learn it. It doesn't seem to be very easy, especially when you need to talk to someone. You use vocabulary that you don't have. You talk about topics that you've never talked about in Spanish, for example. So I think the input is very important here, because that's where you kind of get the vocabulary from, right?
From people.
So people are one way of getting input.
Yes.
Yeah, but still, it's very fascinating that because you are like a native speaker still, even though you don't know that vocabulary, you pick up those words, this vocabulary items like so quickly and efficiently, I guess. If you hear it once, maybe it's enough to remember, or is there any difference? Like maybe when you're learning a foreign language now, maybe French or something, is it easier for you to remember French vocabulary or new Spanish vocabulary? I don't know. Because Spanish has so many variations, I do consciously have to remember to use the variation of the place of where I am in. So you mean different dialects or different national languages? Like in Chile, people speak differently.
Right. And even here in Mexico, for instance, my mom is from a different state. Right. We're currently in Guanajuato, and my mom is from Jalisco. And so a lot of some of the terminology that she used around me is from her specific area. So when I say words here, sometimes they don't know what I'm saying, because I'm using her vocabulary. So I have to consciously remember to use the vocabulary that's used in the region I'm in. Yes. So sometimes I remember, and then other times I don't remember. So, and so I just kind of describe what I'm trying to say, and then they'll say the word, and I said yes because they say the word, and then I remember. Oh yes, that's the word.
So it's a constant learning.
Yes.
But for any language, even for English, you learning new vocabulary
Right.
all the time whenever you explore a new area of interest, right?
Yeah.
So it's still fine, I guess. It's definitely easier to remember a new vocabulary from the language you already know.
Yes.
Than start from scratch a new language.
Yeah. No, it is. It is. Yeah, and yeah, it is, and it's just also a conscious decision to do that. I do have to think of the words that come very natural to me, and I can't say those words in this region. Like for instance, one of them that I use a lot is sacate. And
what's that?
Yeah, sacate, and that's pasto. And I know both words.
Is it grass?
Yes.
Okay.
I know both words. But the natural word that comes to me is sacate. But sacate can also mean sacate, like get out.
Yes.
So when I said here sacate, they looked at me.
Oh, like it's a bit offensive.
Yeah, did you mean like get out? No, I meant the grass, like pasto. So I have to remember.
We don't have much pasta.
Yeah, we don't have much pasta. Yeah, so yeah, I have to consciously make that decision when I'm gonna say the word grass. I say pasto and not sacate. Yeah, that would be an example of, for instance, the word I grew up, and again, I know both words, but the natural one to me is the first one. So when I speak here, I have to remind myself to use the other one. So yeah,
that's really cool. I wish I had that problem. I just learned a new word today. Passata? No. Pastre?
Postre?
No. Grass?
Oh, pasto.
Pasto, yeah.
Pasto,
So that's interesting.
Yes, I don't know if there's another word for it out there, but maybe.
Yeah, maybe in some other Spanish.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating,
yes.
like that you've been having a lot of issues at the beginning with your identity and associating your Spanish with your identity in the community. And now it's just like a tool that helps you grow and helps you explore new places and new careers as well. Yeah. So definitely, I think you are a good example that it's worth putting the time and going through that hardship and putting extra effort to learn it, because guess what? Like people for whom Spanish is not their native language, or they never been exposed as kids to Spanish, they had to go through a lot of hardships, or they have to put a lot of effort to learn it. So take advantage of the fact that you already know your heritage language to a very good level, to a level that helps you develop it much faster and easier.
Yes.
So
yeah, and also like learning to love it. I mean, some people might already do that, but I remember, like, I'm so lucky.
Yeah,
I'm so lucky. I didn't know how lucky I was until later in life. But the fact that I realized it, I thought, oh yeah, I don't have to think a lot about anything. I just know it, and I was able to make it stronger. And if people do that, then it's fascinating, because you already have the tool. You're just making it a lot better.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot better. Yeah.
So that's our message for today. Just go and maintain your language, grow it, because you have a great opportunity and you just need to take it. It's there for you to take it, so good luck with that. Share your experience if you are a bilingual speaker of Spanish or other heritage languages. We would like to hear from you and know your experience. And that would be all for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
See you next video. Bye.